President Yoon Suk Yeol returned home from a diplomatic super week, attending the ASEAN-related Summits and the G20 Summit. We discussed the highlights of his multilateral diplomacy with our correspondent Oh Soo-young, who traveled with the president. Good morning, Soo-young.
Hi, DAMI.
So, Soo-young, there were multiple issues the president addressed during the numerous summits that he attended, from Jakarta to, New Delhi. What would you say was the key takeaway?
Right, well, I think a key feature of President Yoon's summitry this time around was his very bold and confident diplomacy. And that was based on his push for a rules-based international order and also South Korea's contribution as a responsible stakeholder. On North Korea's nuclear missile development, for instance, Yoon clearly warned against attempts to assist or tolerate Pyongyang's weapons program as a direct threat to South Korea and the world, amid speculation that Russia and North Korea may strike an arms deal. He actually told Chinese Premier Li Qiang directly that China should do more to ensure that North Korea doesn't become a stumbling block in Seoul and Beijing's relations. Also, regarding China's expansionary posture in the South China Sea, Yoon said that attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force are unacceptable, calling for a rules-based maritime order and the freedom of navigation. He also raised concern about the ongoing violence in Myanmar and as well as the war in Ukraine, calling Russia's invasion a clear violation of the rule of law, of the international law. And in fact, at the ASEAN and G20 summits, President Yoon was seen as one of the very few world leaders actually speaking quite candidly based on the rule of law and about stopping aggression. And this really marked a significant shift as well from South Korea's previous administrations that were more trade-oriented in terms of diplomacy and also tended to shy away from speaking out on geopolitically sensitive matters. While Yoon has long championed freedom, peace and prosperity, of course, in the region and the world, his messages this time around, they carried a new level of determination, and that was after holding the Camp David Trilateral Summit last month with US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida.
The Camp David principles and spirit provided the momentum to push through the agreements reached at the ASEAN-related Summit in Jakarta and the G20 in New Delhi. This is because the three Camp David countries agreed to cooperate on jointly contributing to the Indo-Pacific region, building the basis for development assistance, maritime security, and advanced digital technology.
Right, and this confidence also extended to Yoon's call for new norms and also rules-based world order, right?
Exactly. So he was really pushing for global leadership in climate, IT and development, which ultimately enables future prosperity for the world, which also it actually benefits Korea as well, its trade-dependent economy. Now, President Yoon pledged $300 million to assist countries vulnerable to climate change with funding necessary for infrastructure, technology and other key enabling factors. He also presented a vision for establishing a green shipping route as well, reaching from Busan to Tacoma and Seattle. He also announced a support package for Ukraine worth more than $2 billion in the form of long-term low-interest loans. He once again called for global norms and an institution on the ethical and sustainable use of AI and digital technology to benefit humanity.
And of course, countries like China have been long wary of South Korea continuing to align with the US and Japan. We have to talk about that as well.
Right. So at Camp David, Seoul, Washington and Tokyo agreed to jointly engage with the Indo-Pacific region in various areas spanning defense, cyber, maritime security to supply chains, infrastructure and even development assistance. These are all areas where China has been looking to expand in rivalry with Washington. So as the largest trading partner of South Korea, Beijing could decide to retaliate economically or politically as it has done in the past. And the same really goes for Japan and Australia as well. But for now, it seems that China may have to get its own house in order first.
Given the difficult state that China's economy is in, potentially going into deflation with their huge housing, real estate bubble, and other economic slowdowns that's happening, it's unlikely that China would want to escalate these retaliatory risks, which could end up hurting its own economy even more. And so that means there is potential for Australia and South Korea to increase its diplomacy to try and manage those risks and to try and improve relations.
President Yoon shared his hope of holding a summit with Japan and China this year when he met with the Chinese premier, who is said to have responded quite positively.
It seems, though, both ASEAN and G20 summits did end with some significant outcomes, despite some, skepticism as key leaders, decided to sit out.
Exactly. So before the summits happened, there was some skepticism. There were some questions over whether even a joint communique could be reached at the G20 due to differences over Ukraine, as well as the significance of the G20 and ASEAN meetings with the leaders of China and Russia absent from both summits, as well as President Joe Biden's absence from the Jakarta summits. But if anything, these results really underscore the importance of multilateralism, in my humble opinion anyway, as non-major powers they projected their voices and also their leadership on tackling common challenges like climate change and even bridging gaps between the global south and the industrialized nations. The African Union joining the G20 is a clear example of this. And when it comes to President Yoon, he notably set out ways to overcome the digital divide, as well as discrepancies in access to finance and technology.
President Biden not attending the ASEAN-related summits was seen as a bit of a misstep, but by South Korea, as a strong ally of the United States, taking such action, it is stepping in for the United States to an extent, as is Japan and also Australia, playing a similar role too as US allies in the region.
Right, and Soo-young, both of the summits also provided some space for economic diplomacy, right?
Yes, so President Yoon on the sidelines of both summits. In total, he held around 20 bilateral meetings, as well as economic events that were planned alongside the summits. And well, during those bilaterals, 22 MOUs were penned with Indonesia, which is the largest economy in ASEAN and the world's fourth most populous country. They were signed across various fields such as core minerals, nuclear power, mobility, even halal food and hospital-related operations. And Korea also signed its 22nd FTA, and that was with the Philippines. That document is expected to greatly improve market conditions for Korean goods, especially automobiles. Now, when it comes to India, Korea agreed to strengthen investment cooperation in digital and green industries, infrastructure, as well as cutting-edge science and tech, as well as bolster networking platforms for Korean firms looking to enter the Indian market. So the ASEAN and India, the ASEAN region and India rather, they together account for around 21% of South Korea's export market. So these were just very important deals that President Yoon saw through.
Korea and ASEAN should form a kind of mutual value chain based on global partnership. Korean companies especially need a lot of resources, and then securing human brains from the ASEAN countries to gain competitiveness. In this sense, Korea can contribute for the gender equality and then lessening the income inequality among ASEAN countries also.
Well, it was quite a diplomatic marathon. Thank you, Soo-young, so much for covering this from Jakarta to New Delhi.
Well, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back.